Penny Jameson's hands trembled as she gripped the side of the sink in the tiny airport bathroom, her chest tightening like a vise. She couldn't breathe. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting a harsh glow across her pale face in the mirror. Her perfectly tailored trench coat clung to her sweat-slicked skin as her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Not here. Not now, not when she was supposed to disappear. Just for a week, just to be normal. To escape the boardrooms, the press, the constant expectations of being the heiress to Jameson Holdings. She hadn't planned for a full-blown panic attack in the middle of a rural airport in upstate New York, and then she heard the voice. Hey. Hey, are you okay? Penny blinked, vision blurred with tears as a man stepped into the doorway. A man with broad shoulders, a strong jaw, and the kind of eyes that made you want to trust him even when you knew better. She gasped, trying to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. He didn't hesitate. He moved to her side, slow and steady, crouching slightly so he wasn't towering over her. You're having a panic attack. It's okay. Just breathe with me, all right? His voice was low, calm, patient. He didn't know who she was, thank God. He held out his hand, palm up. I'm Bennett Taylor, you're safe, I got you. Penny stared at his hand like it was a lifeline, then she took it. He guided her to sit on the floor beside the sink, ignoring the awkward glances from other travelers. In through your nose, he said gently. Hold it, now out through your mouth. We'll do it together. It took 5 minutes for her chest to stop aching, 10 for her hands to stop shaking, but he never let go of her. He stayed right beside her like he had nowhere else to be. She finally looked up. I'm Penny. Those warm brown eyes met hers. Nice to meet you, Penny. She managed a shaky breath and half a laugh. That was humiliating. He shook his head. That was human. Something about the way he said it made her throat tighten again, but not from panic this time. He helped her up and walked her to a bench just outside the gate. You traveling alone, she nodded, hugging her coat tighter around her. Needed a break from life, he smiled, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. Yeah, I get that. A small voice interrupted them. Daddy? Penny turned to see a little girl in a bright pink jacket running toward them, her curls bouncing as she threw herself into Bennett's arms. There's my girl, he laughed, lifting her easily. Penny, this is Grace. Grace, this is Miss Penny. Grace gave Penny a shy wave. Hi, Penny smiled, the warmth of it catching her off guard. Hi, Grace. We're headed back home, Bennett said, standing with Grace in his arms. We live about 10 minutes from here. You staying nearby? Yeah. Booked a cabin for a week, just… Needed quiet. You picked the right place, he chuckled. Not much up here but trees, lakes, and silence. You'll love it. She didn't know what made her say it, maybe the way he looked at her like she wasn't some headline, but the words came before she could stop them. Would you mind driving me? My rental's delayed and I honestly don't trust myself behind the wheel right now. He hesitated. Not because he didn't want to help, she could tell, but because he had a kid to think about. I completely understand if… No, he said. It's okay, Grace has her car seat. We've got room. She followed them out to the parking lot, where he unlocked an older black SUV that looked well used but clean. Grace chattered the whole way, telling Penny about her stuffed animals and her favorite cereal. Bennett listened with the kind of attention that made Penny's chest ache. He was a single dad, that much was clear, but there was no bitterness in his tone. Just love. They pulled up to the cabin she'd rented, a modest frame nestled between tall pines, and he helped her with her bag despite her protests. I'll be fine, she said gently. You've already done more than enough. I don't think that's true, he replied, looking at her a little too long. Penny looked away first. He handed her the suitcase. If you need anything, we're just 5 minutes down the road. There's only one diner in town, and I'm there most mornings with Grace. She nodded, her fingers brushing his as she took the handle. Thank you for everything. He hesitated, then said, You've got kind eyes, Penny, and then he left. She stood in the doorway long after the SUV disappeared behind the trees, her heart pounding for a completely different reason now. The next morning, she found herself at the diner. She hadn't planned to go. She wasn't even hungry. But the thought of seeing them again pulled her out of bed and into a pair of jeans for the first time in months. When she walked through the door, Grace spotted her first. Miss Penny, Bennett turned, surprise flickering in his eyes. Look who showed up. She slid into the booth across from them, cheeks flushed. Figured I owed you breakfast. You don't owe me anything, he said. I know, but I still want to. He smiled, and it hit her square in the chest. They ate pancakes and eggs and laughed more than she had in months. Bennett told her about his job as a mechanic, about how he'd raised Grace alone since her mom left 2 years ago. There was no drama in his voice, just honesty. He asked about her life, and she lied, just a little, said she used to work in finance, needed a break, which wasn't entirely untrue. She didn't tell him she was Penny Jameson, sole heir to a multi-million-dollar empire. She didn't want the shift, didn't want the calculation in his eyes. Here she was just Penny. And for once that felt like enough. Over the next few days she kept running into them, at the grocery store, at the park, at the lake, or maybe she wasn't running into them at all. Maybe she was finding reasons to be near. One afternoon, Grace tugged at her hand and said, "Can you come to our house for dinner? Daddy makes really good spaghetti." Bennett looked embarrassed. "Grace, I'd love to," Penny said before he could protest. That night she sat at their worn wooden table, eating spaghetti with too much garlic and laughing at Grace's knock-knock jokes. The house was small, cozy, filled with mismatched furniture and warmth. It wasn't her world. But she didn't want to leave it. After Grace went to bed, Penny helped him wash dishes. Their hands brushed in the sink and he looked at her, really looked at her. "I've never seen Grace open up to someone that fast," he said, voice low. "She's special." "She is," he agreed. "But so are you." Penny's breath caught. "Bennett." He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt it. "Tell me if I'm reading this wrong." "You're not," she whispered, and then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't wild, it was honest, deep, real. She stood in his kitchen with suds on her hands and his mouth on hers, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt like she could breathe. She didn't know what this was, or where it was going, but she knew she didn't want it to stop. The first snow of the season arrived quietly, dusting the cabins and pine trees in a hushed white glow. Penny stood barefoot on the porch of her rented cabin, mug of coffee warming her fingers, watching the flakes fall like secrets from the sky. She hadn't seen snow this way in years, not through tinted limousine windows or from the wraparound terrace of a high-rise penthouse, but close enough to feel it settle on her lashes. She hadn't texted Bennett since that night, not because she regretted the kiss. God, no. If anything, she kept replaying it, how gentle his hands had been, how careful his lips, how he'd looked at her afterward like she was something real. That was the problem. He thought she was something real, someone simple, someone ordinary, and she'd let him believe that. She hadn't meant to lie. Not really, it had just happened. She hadn't expected to meet someone like him, hadn't expected to care. But now her week was almost up, and the thought of leaving, of going back to her life where every relationship came with a contract or a clause, made her stomach twist. Her phone buzzed on the porch railing. One word lit up the screen. "Dinner." Penny stared at it. Her thumb hovered over the reply, but instead of typing anything, she grabbed her coat. She arrived at his house just as the sun was dipping below the trees, painting the sky in deep bruises of violet and orange. The porch light was already on, casting a golden circle on the snow-dusted steps. Before she could knock, the door opened. "You came," Bennett said, his voice low with something between surprise and hope. "I didn't want to miss your terrible spaghetti again," she teased, stepping inside and brushing snow from her hair. He laughed, locking the door behind her. "I made chili this time." "You've been warned." Grace came barreling down the hall, her arms full of construction paper and glitter. "Miss Penny, look what I made you." Penny crouched, accepting the chaotic swirl of glue and stars like it was a priceless artifact. "This is beautiful." "Is that a unicorn with a crown?" "It's you," Grace said proudly. "Because Daddy said you were magic." Penny's breath hitched. Bennett cleared his throat, suddenly very interested in the stove. "Dinner's almost ready." They ate by candlelight, not for ambience, but because the overhead bulb had blown and he hadn't replaced it yet. Still, the flicker of the flame made the moment feel too intimate, too close. She could feel her walls weakening with every glance he stole her way. After Grace went to bed, Penny helped him carry the dishes to the sink. He didn't reach for her this time. He didn't have to. The silence between them was thick with everything they weren't saying. She dried her hands on a dish towel and leaned against the counter, searching his face. Why haven't you asked what I'm running from? Bennett kept his eyes on the sink. Because you'd tell me if you wanted to. She felt the truth of it settle in her chest, heavy and warm. You trust people that easily? No, he said, but I trust you. She looked away, unable to hold his gaze. You shouldn't, I know. The front door rattled suddenly 3 sharp knocks. Bennett frowned. That's weird. No one comes by this late. He opened the door and the cold rushed in along with a man in a sleek wool coat and polished shoes, clearly not from around here. There you are, the man said, brushing past Bennett like he didn't exist. Do you have any idea how many messages you've ignored? Your father is furious. Penny went still. Bennett turned to her slowly. Penny, her throat closed up. She hadn't expected it to happen like this. She hadn't prepared for it to happen at all. The man, Gavin, one of her father's assistants, was already pulling out his phone. We have a car waiting. The board meeting was moved to tomorrow and you're expected in Manhattan by 8. Bennett's voice was quiet. Board meeting, Penny met his eyes. I was going to tell you. When? I don't know, she whispered. After, Gavin scoffed. After what? You finished playing house. Get out, Bennett said, his voice dangerous and low. Gavin raised an eyebrow. Excuse me, you heard me. Penny stepped between them. Gavin, wait in the car. But now, he hesitated, then turned and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. You're not who you said you were, Bennett said finally. I never said who I was. I let you into my life. Into my daughter's life. I didn't plan this, she said, voice shaking. I didn't come here to lie, Bennett. I just needed space. I needed to be someone else for a minute. And that someone was who? Poor, vulnerable Penny who needed help from the local mechanic. That's not fair. No, he said, his jaw tight. What's not fair is thinking I mattered to you when I was just a break from your real life. She stepped forward. You do matter. Do I? His voice cracked. Because it feels like I was just a vacation. Penny felt her defenses crumbling. I've never felt this safe with anyone. I've never laughed like that, or woken up excited to see someone's name on my phone. What we have, it's real. He looked at her like he wanted to believe her. But something in him had closed off, like a door slammed shut. I don't belong in your world, Penny. You belong in mine more than anyone I've ever met. That's not true, he said quietly, because I'd never ask you to lie about who you are. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. He turned away. She left with snow clinging to her coat, her boots crunching across the frozen ground as she climbed into the sleek black car Gavin had waiting. Her chest ached, but she didn't wipe the tears that slipped down her cheeks. She'd come here to escape everything. Instead, she'd found the one thing she couldn't run from. The next morning, the media was already buzzing. Heiress vanishes for a weak romantic getaway or nervous breakdown. Penny stared at the screen in the back of the car as they drove through Manhattan. Her reflection in the tinted window looked hollow, like a stranger wearing her face. Her father was waiting when she stepped into the boardroom. He didn't embrace her, didn't ask where she'd been. He simply slid a contract across the table. We need you focused, he said. Enough games. She stared at the paper, then at the room full of men who saw her only as a signature, a name, a pawn, and for the first time she didn't sit down. I'm not signing anything, she said. Her father blinked. Excuse me, I'm not doing this anymore. You're the face of this company. No, she said. I'm just a girl who needed a moment to breathe, and I found someone who made me realize I don't owe any of you my life. She walked out without waiting for a response. Outside, the city roared around her. Cabs honked, people shouted, and snow turned to slush beneath her heels. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket and stared at Bennett's name. She didn't call, not yet, not until she had something real to say. But she wasn't done, not with him. Not with them, not even close. The first time Bennett saw her again, she was standing in the middle of his garage. It had been almost 2 weeks since she'd left in the middle of a snowstorm, in the middle of him realizing he'd let something slip right through his fingers. And now she was here, wearing a long tan coat over a navy sweater dress, her hair pulled back, snow clinging to her lashes. He didn't move from under the lifted hood of the pickup truck, just wiped his hands on a rag and stared. I didn't know where else to go, Penny said, his jaw tightened. I figured I wouldn't see you again. I thought that too, she admitted, stepping further inside, her heels echoing on the concrete floor. but I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about grace, about trust. He dropped the rag onto the workbench. So you came back to apologize, her breath hitched. I came back to explain. I don't need an explanation. You do, she said, voice steady now. Because I let you believe you knew me and that wasn't fair. I lied by omission. I led you into something you didn't agree to. His arms crossed. Yeah, you did. But everything else, none of that was a lie. Not the way I felt when I was with you, not what I feel now. His eyes searched hers, but he stayed where he was. You said you needed space, a break. Turns out it was from being someone like me. No, she said quickly. It was from being someone I didn't recognize anymore. Everything that mattered, money, reputation, power, it all felt like noise. And then you happened. A long silence stretched between them. Then he said, you didn't once pick up the phone. I was scared. Of what? That if I called, you'd tell me not to come back. He didn't look away. You think showing up here changes anything? I don't know, she said. But I had to try. He stared at her for a moment longer, then turned and reached for his wrench again. I've got work to finish. She swallowed the sting of disappointment and nodded. Okay, she turned to go. Wait, he said, not looking at her. Grace misses you. Her steps paused. She asks about you every night before bed, every morning over cereal. I've run out of ways to say I don't know when you're coming back. Penny turned slowly. I didn't mean to disappear from her life too. She doesn't understand why you're not here anymore, he said. And I don't know how to explain it without making you a villain. I'll talk to her. She's at school. I'll wait. He finally looked at her. Why? Because I'm not leaving this time. That night, Penny sat across from Grace at the kitchen table, helping her glue paper feathers onto a construction turkey. Bennett leaned against the doorway, arms folded, quiet. Grace squinted at the mess of glue on her paper. It's not as good as the one you made with me before. It's perfect, Penny said. You know why? Why? Because you made it. Grace beamed, her front teeth missing. Daddy said you went away. You're not going away again, are you? Penny glanced up at Bennett. Only if you want me to, Grace frowned. I don't. The moment cracked something wide open in his chest. Later, when Grace was asleep and the house had gone still, Penny stood in the living room, staring at the old bookshelf filled with picture frames and trinkets. Bennett joined her, his expression unreadable. You really left it all behind, he asked. Yes, just like that. No, she said. It took me years. He studied her, then exhaled. So what now? I don't know, she said. I don't expect to be part of your life again just because I came back. But I want to earn it. His voice was quiet. It's not just my life anymore. I know. He took a step closer. You're not the only one who got scared. Penny looked up at him. What were you scared of? That I wasn't enough for someone like you. She shook her head. You're more than enough. You're everything. His throat worked, but no words came. I've done things I'm not proud of, she said. I've let people mold me into what they needed, but when I was here with you and Grace, I remembered how to breathe again. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for her hand, and for the first time since she'd left, he pulled her close. The kiss wasn't hesitant. It wasn't tender. It was deep and aching, full of all the things they hadn't said. When they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his. I'm not looking for a fairy tale, I just want real. This is real, he said, even if it doesn't look like anything either of us expected. Especially then, she whispered. The next day, she didn't move back into the cabin. She moved into the spare room down the hall from Grace's, surrounded by pink walls and glow-in-the-dark stars. She got a job waitressing at the diner. No one in town treated her differently. Whether they'd figured out who she was or not, no one asked. No one cared. She brought coffee to tired truckers and cleared plates from booths with sticky syrup rings. She'd never felt more grounded. One afternoon, she came home to find Bennett hunched over the kitchen table with blueprints spread out in front of him. He looked up as she stepped inside. I'm thinking about expanding the garage, her eyes lit with surprise. Really? Yeah, I've had more work than I can take lately. Thought about hiring someone, maybe adding another bay. She walked over and glanced at the drawings. That's incredible. Why now? He shrugged. Because for the first time, it feels like I'm building something that doesn't just belong to me. She traced a finger over the pencil lines. You're good at this. He looked at her. So are you, her brow furrowed. At what? Living in a world that doesn't hand you everything, she smiled faintly. I like this world better. He leaned against the table. You ever think about doing something with all that business experience, starting something that's yours instead of your father's? She blinked. I used to, then I forgot I wanted that. Maybe it's time to remember. She stared at him, heart thudding. You sound like you believe in me. I do. The moment hung between them like a promise. That night, she sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars blink awake. Bennett stepped outside, 2 mugs in his hands. He handed her one and sat beside her. I talked to Grace, he said. Oh, she asked if you were staying forever. Penny's heart throbbed. What did you tell her? I said I hoped so. She turned to him, eyes wide. I'm not proposing, he said quickly. I'm just saying I want you here, not just in this house, in this life. She swallowed hard. I want that too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. He placed it in her hand. Not her ring, he said. But it means the same thing. She stared at it, speechless. I love you, Penny. Her breath caught. I love you too, she whispered. He pulled her close, and the stars overhead seemed to burn a little brighter. She hadn't needed a mansion or a title to feel like she belonged. She'd needed this porch, this key, this man and his daughter, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The first time Penny stepped into the town's winter festival with Grace on one hand and Bennett on the other, she didn't feel like an outsider. There was no polite curiosity, no sideways glances, no hushed whispers. Just the crunch of snow under her boots, the scent of roasted chestnuts curling through the air, and the soft laughter of children chasing each other around a makeshift ice rink. Grace tugged at her hand. Can we make cookies at the big table, Miss Penny? The one with the sprinkles. Penny squeezed her fingers. Only if you promise not to eat the frosting before it's on the cookie. I can't promise that, Grace said without hesitation, darting toward the decorated tent with a trail of giggles in her wake. Bennett handed Penny a warm cider and watched his daughter dive into a bowl of red and green sugar crystals. She's been asking about this all week. It's perfect, Penny said, taking a sip. It reminds me of when I was little, before everything. He glanced sideways at her. Before your name had a corporation attached to it, she nodded, eyes scanning the rows of glowing paper lanterns, the couples dancing near the bandstand, the old man dressed like Santa posing with toddlers. Before I stopped knowing what I wanted. And now, she hesitated, then looked up at him. Now I know. He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't have to. Later, as the festival wound down and Grace snored softly in the backseat of Bennett's SUV, Penny sat beside him in the front, her fingers curled around his. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was full, rich, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. He drove slowly through the snow-dusted roads, the headlights illuminating the trees like ghostly towers. When they pulled into the driveway, Penny reached for the door handle, but Bennett stopped her with a gentle touch to her arm. There's something I want to show you, he said. She followed him into the garage. It was warmer than she expected, with a space heater humming softly in the corner and a new coat of paint on the walls. On the workbench beside a row of tools sat a small, open wooden box. Inside were sketches, dozens of them. Some were of cars. Some were of an expanded blueprint for the garage. But others were different, cozier, more personal. She picked one up. Is this a bookstore? He nodded. Grace and I talked about it. She said if you ever stayed for real, you'd miss your big city places, so I thought, maybe we could build something like that here. A place that feels like yours. Her throat tightened. You were planning this before I came back. I never stopped thinking about you. He leaned on the workbench beside her. Even when I wanted to. She laughed softly, blinking back the tears that threatened. You're really bad at pretending you don't care, you know. I know, I'm terrible at it. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the idea settling between them. You'd really build this, she asked. If you'd help me, he said. I can handle the walls and the roof. But I don't know the first thing about running a business like that. She looked down at the sketch again. In the drawing, there was a little bell on the door and a window seat with cushions. Then it's a good thing I do, he smiled, but it was softer than usual, more reverent. So you're staying? Penny looked at him, really looked at him, and nodded. I'm not going anywhere. The following weeks passed in a blur of motion. Penny leased a small property on Main Street 1 that had been sitting vacant for 2 years and had once been a bakery. She and Bennett worked side by side to gut the inside, stripping old wallpaper, sanding wood floors, measuring shelves. Grace insisted on picking the name. She called it the Wild Page. Penny didn't ask why. She just nodded and painted it in gold script above the door. Bennett built the bookshelves by hand. Penny stocked them with titles she remembered loving when she was 13 and hiding from the world, when books were the only places she felt safe. The town rallied in quiet support. People donated used novels. The local coffee roaster offered to set up a small corner stand. Grace spent every afternoon after school curled up in the reading nook, pretending to run the register with a plastic tiara on her head. One evening, as they stood in the finished shop, the scent of fresh paint still lingering and the overhead lights casting a warm glow across the polished floors, Penny turned to Bennett. "You made this possible." He shook his head. "You did." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You gave me space to remember who I was. You didn't try to fix me, you just saw me." "And you saw me," he said. "Not as a single parent, not as a guy who changes oil for a living, just me." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly. It was a legal document, a certificate of resignation from the Jameson board. "I'm not going back," she said. "Not ever." He looked at the paper, then at her. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." His hands cradled her face gently, his thumbs brushing the corners of her mouth. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Penny Jameson," she laughed, eyes glistening. "Well, technically I'm not anymore, just Penny." "No," he said softly, "you'll always be Penny to me. But you're more than that, too." The kiss was slow, deep, and full of everything they hadn't known how to say until now. In the corner, Grace called out, "You, not again." They pulled apart, laughing. 2 weeks later, during the shop's grand opening, the entire town came. Couples wandered through the aisles, children darted between shelves, and older women lingered over romance novels with knowing smiles. Penny stood behind the counter, watching it all with a kind of peace she'd never known. Bennett walked over, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. "You look like you belong here." "I feel like I do," she said. For the first time, Grace tugged on Penny's sleeve. "Daddy said we're going to the lake after this. You're coming too, right?" Penny crouched to look her in the eyes. "Always." That night, after the store was locked and the lights were off, Bennett led Penny down to the lake. The moon reflected silver across the water, and the cold air nipped at her cheeks. A blanket was already laid out on the dock, a thermos waiting beside it. They sat together, wrapped in each other, the stars winking above them. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into the pocket of his coat. She blinked. "What?" He didn't answer, just took her hand and slid something cool and delicate onto her finger. It wasn't a diamond. It was a simple gold band with a tiny engraving on the inside. "You're home now," her breath caught. He didn't ask a question. He didn't get down on one knee. He just looked into her eyes and said, "Stay with me." She nodded, heart full. Forever. They kissed under the stars, the lake still, the trees silent witnesses. And in that moment, it didn't matter who she used to be. She was his. He was hers. And together, they were exactly what they were always meant to be, a family. Penny stood in front of the mirror in the back room of the Wild Page, smoothing her dress with slightly trembling hands. The shop was quiet, closed for the day, but the shelves still smelled like fresh wood and vanilla, scented wax melts. Outside, the sky had turned a pale gold, the late winter sun casting long shadows through the frosted windows. The door creaked open behind her. "You okay?" Bennett's voice was quieter than usual, like he already knew the answer. She turned, her reflection forgotten. "I don't know. I've handled board meetings with shareholders worth more than small nations, but tonight I can't seem to remember how to breathe." He stepped into the room, his eyes soft. "It's just dinner." "It's dinner with your father," she said, folding her arms. "Who's flying in from Boston to meet me after hearing I've moved in with his son and granddaughter." "Technically, you're not wrong," he said, slipping his arms around her waist. "You have moved in." She leaned into him, exhaling slowly. "I just want him to like me." "Penny," he said, brushing his thumb under her jaw, "he's going to love you, but more importantly, he's going to see how much I do." She tilted her head, meeting his gaze. "You sure you don't want to tell him who I really am before we get there?" "I thought you were Penny." The woman who rebuilt her life in a town with 2 traffic lights and a single coffee machine. She grinned slightly. That coffee machine has personality. He kissed her forehead. You don't have to prove anything to him. You've already proven everything to me. Still, when they arrived at the restaurant, a renovated barn with string lights woven through the rafters, her pulse stuttered. Grace skipped ahead, clutching a book she wanted to show her grandfather, while Penny and Bennett followed more slowly. His father, Richard Taylor, stood near the entrance. Trim and silver-haired, he had the kind of presence that spoke more in posture than words. His eyes landed on Penny, and she felt the weight of his gaze slide over her like a spotlight. "You must be Penny," he said, offering his hand. "I've heard more about you than I have about the market this week." She shook his hand firmly, matching his tone. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is," he said. "Though I'm still trying to figure out how my son managed to convince someone like you to give up whatever city you came from for a place like this." Penny raised an eyebrow. "Maybe he didn't have to convince me," Bennett chuckled. She convinced herself, Dad. Dinner passed with surprising ease. Richard asked about the shop, and Penny spoke with steady confidence about her plans to include local authors and host monthly readings. Grace told him about her new reading corner and how she got to stamp the books sometimes like a real librarian. When the plates were cleared and dessert arrived, Richard leaned back studying them. "I'll admit, I had my doubts." "But it's clear you've built something real here." Penny met his eyes across the table. "That's what I was looking for." He paused, then nodded once. "I can see that." In the car on the way home, Grace fell asleep in her booster seat, her book clutched to her chest. Bennett reached over, lacing his fingers through Penny's. "You held your own," he said. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I know, but you didn't show it." She glanced at him, the passing streetlights casting gold and amber across his features. "You make it easier to be brave." Back at the house, they carried Grace in together. Penny tucked her under the quilt in her room, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Bennett leaned against the doorway, watching silently. "She's changed me," Penny whispered. "So have you," he said. They stood in the hallway for a moment, the quiet thick between them. "Come outside with me," he said. She followed him barefoot onto the back porch. The sky stretched wide above them, stars scattered like thrown glitter. He handed her a mug of tea but didn't speak. Then he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Her breath caught. Bennett didn't drop to one knee. He didn't make a speech. He simply opened the box, revealing a ring with a delicate, rose-cut diamond set in an antique gold band. "This life we've built," he said, "it doesn't make sense without you in it. I know we've already chosen each other in every way that counts, but I want to make it official. I want to promise you everything, every day, every mistake, every joy." She blinked quickly, swallowing the emotion rising in her throat. "I don't need perfect," he said. "I just need you." She nodded, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes, God, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, his hand steady. Then he kissed her, and everything else faded: the cold, the stars, the years between who they'd been and who they'd become. They married 3 months later in a clearing near the lake, with pine trees as witnesses, and the town gathered in folding chairs that didn't quite match. Grace wore a crown of wildflowers and carried a book instead of a bouquet. Penny walked down the aisle alone, her spine straight, eyes locked on Bennett's. He wore a navy suit and a look that said he couldn't believe she was real. Their vows were handwritten, unpolished and perfect. "I didn't fall in love with your name," Bennett said. "I fell in love with the way you looked at Grace like she was a gift, the way you fought to find yourself again, the way you made me believe we could have more." Penny held his hands tightly. "I didn't come here looking for a future. I thought I was running away, but I found you and I found us. That's the best thing I've ever done." They kissed to applause and Grace shouted, "Finally!" The reception was held in the Wild Page, cleared of books for the evening and strung with flowers and photos of the 3 of them laughing on the porch, building shelves, dancing barefoot in the kitchen. They danced their first dance between the stacks, their song playing softly from a vintage record player. Penny rested her head on Bennett's shoulder, breathing him in. "You happy?" he asked. "I didn't think it was possible to be this happy." "You were never lost, Penny," he said. "You were just waiting for the right place to land." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "I'm home." Years later, the shop flourished. Penny launched a small publishing imprint from the back office, giving voice to local talent. Bennett expanded the garage and hired 2 apprentices. Grace grew into a fierce, funny teenager who still curled up in the reading nook when she thought no one was watching. They built a life of small joys, slow Sunday mornings, impromptu snowball fights, spontaneous road trips to nowhere. No spotlights, no boardrooms, just love, steady and strong. And every night, when Penny closed the shop and walked home through the quiet town, she slipped the key into the door of the house they'd made together, where warmth waited and laughter echoed in the walls. This wasn't the life she'd been born into. It was better.